Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this space. I'm so excited today to be here with you all. I'm going to have to apologize to your chairman, but I thank him because he does have PowerPoints or slides that I will cover today as we talk. However, in the middle of this, and this is how God works and the Spirit leads us, right? I saw Detective King present, right? And so I'm listening to this brother in terms of talking about insurance, and I'm weaving together and integrating the importance of mental wellness. I also want to take point to, I saw y'all engaging him and asking him questions, right? And so when we talk about mental wellness and taking care of our soul, I don't want y'all to get quiet, because sometimes this is the part, especially when us sisters and brothers, we kind of exit the stage to the left when we start talking about mental health. But it's so important because this is the fiber of who we are and how we show up and our ability to be able to make choices for ourselves, but also for our family. Someone mentioned the importance of generational wealth, building generational wealth. Someone mentioned the fact of if we know the laws, now we can teach our youth. We also got to teach our youth about mental wellness. And you all said to know thyself. We got to know our mental wellness, what makes us tick, what sets us off, right? Because we're human beings, and there are going to be things that bother us, that make us sad, that frustrate us. And so when we know the things that impact us, we can also identify the things that help calm us down, that help soothe us, okay? And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not going to stick to these slides. I just want y'all to know that, so please forgive me. I will cover some points because I think it's going to be important for us to cover it. One of the things that I learned back in 2013 when I worked with your chairman was that there were some spaces that were talking to us about mental wellness, but they didn't look like us. I remember sitting in a suicide prevention workshop over at Georgia's Georgia Perimeter now, which is a part of Georgia State, a auditorium full of black and brown folks. And I was the only African American person sitting up there, the only black person. And so they're looking at us talk about suicide, which is a challenging topic to talk about, right? We usually get super quiet when we hear about that, and it really wasn't resonating with the students. And so I said to them, I know we don't talk about it in our community. I know there's a myth that black people don't kill themselves, but it's not true. And I'm here to tell you that. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I also challenge you all. You all have in the room 2 amazing LCSWs. And so we don't often get this. And so I want you to take advantage of it. In addition to me being at LCSW, I just want to run down some of my expertise, not for me, but for you all to know some of the topic areas I can cover. Especially over the past 20-something months, I've been doing critical incident debriefings. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Have you all been impacted by the pandemic?
Yes.
Absolutely. There is not a person or a child who has not been impacted by this pandemic. Do you all think that impacts our mental wellness?
Yes.
1,000%. And so a lot of corporate entities are bringing me in and saying, hey, can you talk to my people about mental wellness? Now, some of that is us, and some of it is not. So I want you all to take full advantage of that. Suicide, domestic violence, mental wellness, homelessness, all of those are the areas that I serve as a subject matter expertise. And so I love when I get to sit in front of my brothers and sisters and provide information and knowledge that we may not have access to. So I encourage you all to just think through. Take a moment and pause, which we don't often get to do. I always say take a Selah moment. And think about how you're responding to everything we've been through in the past, 20 plus months. Because it hasn't been easy. But for us, it's never been easy, right? And so we forget about that. So as I go through this, bear with me. I'm going to be flexible as I go in and out of this presentation. If there's something on this presentation that I did not address that you got a question about, feel free to interrupt me. You don't have to wait till the end in terms of questions. We're going to flow with the spirit of this today, okay? So this is self-care for the soul. And it's so important that we take care of ourselves. One of the things that I found in this work that I'm doing, I realized that oftentimes we don't get a chance to really think about how we're feeling. What is our mental state? How does it impact our soul? And so it's up to us for us to take a moment and say, you know what? I'm going to check in with myself to make sure that I'm okay, because I need to be okay for me, my partner, spouse, my family, my children, etc. And then we got to raise the babies to let them know that as well. And so if you all grew up in a household like I did, and I have older parents. My parents were, it's funny, my father was 60 and my mom was 41. And so no one talked to me about how to handle stress. I knew stress was present. Like, we knew when things in the household was quiet, right? When there was some tension. But no one said, but babe, when you get stressed out, this is what you do, or this is how we do it. No one talked about mental wellness. Or for you to just take a moment to decompress. Was that just my household, or was that y'all household as well? And many of us today are doing the same thing. And so one of the things that I walk away with from 2020, and I'm going to redo my language. I'm big on words that I use because words have energy. I've been saying we are not okay. This is not normal. And so many of us walk around today and say, oh, I'm fine. When someone says, how are you doing? Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm good. I'm okay, right? It's like a normal response. Yeah. It's a reflex. It just comes out, even if we're not okay.
I dislike that. Mm-hmm. When you ask somebody, are they okay? They might not be all as well. They might really want to tell you, no, I'm going through this and that, the world crumbling on me. Like, we can't all just say what everybody want to hear all the time, man. Like, sometimes people really going through problems. They need to, can't cope everything, man.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I like that you said is the world is crumbling. Like, that resonated with me because there's a lot going on.
I have respect for our speakers. I want to keep let them get through the presentation. We have comments.
I did that. I'm sorry, I did that. I told you just talk to me. And so, but to your point, it's a lot of stuff going on, and so we have to acknowledge that. So one of the things that I say is, how are you managing and how are you coping? Off the premise that I know we're not okay. This is not normal to be in the middle of a pandemic. I say pandemic 2.0 because it's the second year of it, right? We went home in March of 2020. We thought we were going to be out for 4 weeks, right? We were on lockdown. And then we thought we were going to go back to work, go into our offices, and we were going to continue business as usual. But here it is, what are we in, September 2021? And the numbers are still high. And then Delta came out of nowhere. This is, matter of fact, this is trauma.
That's right.
If we did not know, and that's something that we often don't talk about. We don't talk about the trauma word in our community. And so I'm going to talk about some of that today. First up, I want to ask, what are some of the myths that we hear in our community related to mental health? Let's see how well y'all do about this topic with crowd participation. What are some of the myths? Or why don't we seek mental health treatment?
They need therapy. I think everyone needs therapy, especially in the Black community. Mental health awareness is needed predominantly in our Black communities. And then people think that when you say, oh, you need therapy. Oh, I'm not crazy. No, I'm not crazy. Like, no, everyone needs therapy. Somebody needs someone to talk to and talk to them about what's wrong with your therapy.
Absolutely. And so you said it. People automatically think I'm crazy. And it's kind of, there's nothing wrong with me, right? Or the fact that you're saying that alludes to something is wrong with me. It's not what's wrong with you. It's what has happened to us. Right. And all of us have stuff that has happened to us. Whether it's historical, that has been passed down over generations and impacted us with epigenetics, right? We don't give enough credit to that. That changes our DNA, our responses. Right. And so when we wonder why we act or why we respond the way in which we do, a lot of that is related to that. And then if we grew up in a household or in a certain environment where things were very loud, where there was a lot of community violence, that's going to cause us to have a reaction. And a lot of this stuff is how our brain interprets information. And so we got to really step away from the fact that something is wrong with someone to, no, this is what I've been exposed to. And a lot of it, I did not have a choice. And so I'm going to seek the proper help and resources because, as this sister said, everybody deserves therapy. And that's the premise that I operate from. In addition, for those of us who are working, there is also EAP, Employment Assistance Program. I'm going to talk about resources because I feel like I would do a disservice if I come up here and talk about overarching information and then don't give you resources or ways to connect, because we all need to connect. In our community, as human beings, period, most of us go to the doctor, once a year for our physical exams. But when I ask people, when was the last time you checked in on your mental wellness? Either I haven't seen a therapist, it's been years, or one of the ones that I love, you know what, I've been thinking about seeing a therapist, but I just haven't did it yet. Why not? What's keeping you from it? One of the things that was set up here is we are our worst enemy. We are our own worst enemy. And when it comes to that, we are. Because oftentimes we have access to resources that we don't even tap into. And nobody's keeping it from us. We just not tapping into it. And for me, that's sad because we're doing a disservice to ourselves, our family, and our community. Any other myths?
This is how my grandmama did it. This is how my mama did it. That's how I'm gonna do it.
Right.
And right, I'm gonna beat it out you. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with you.
So continue to do the same thing over and over, which is the definition of insanity. And then you said pray, absolutely. And so we still get this when we go into communities. Or, and I've heard it even worse, if you were connected to your Lord and Savior, right, you wouldn't need therapy, all of that stuff. We can't do that. We can't do that. There was a meme that was on Facebook that said something about some of y'all are trying to pray stuff away that you should have seen a therapist for. And that's a lot, because when we go into our churches and our temples and our faith-based institutions, people are sick and needing help and support. And so if we know ourselves and we're honest with ourselves, then we can say, you know what? I'm not feeling my best self today. It's not that I'm crazy. To me, crazy is needing help and not reaching out to get it. Now, that's crazy to me, because it's going to get worse. You're going to get physically sick. You can come down with mental health disorders and challenges, etc. But we could have stopped it. Or we could have, better yet, focused on prevention, especially if you're employed with an employer and you got EAP, you get therapy, a certain amount of sessions, absolutely free of charge. So it would be insane for you not to access those resources and benefits. And I get it, our community has done a disservice, right? We're very taboo about mental wellness. We don't talk about it. It stays on the inside. We tell folks to go pray, do what they need to do, etc. Those who have behavioral health disorders, we keep them in the back rooms. We do all of these things to hush and suppress it. And what is it doing? I pulled up a data statistic while I was sitting in the back, and it says, and I'm covering this, and I'm going to cover some adult statistics, but we tend to, right, us as adults, we tend to think about others. And so I'm going to give you some youth statistics. It says, according to a recent study, African American boys between the ages of 5 and 12 are more likely to die by suicide than any other age group. 5 to 12. Nationwide suicides among black children under 18 are up 71% in the past decade. I wasn't even going to cover that today, but something told me to Google that. I got another data point, and then I'm going to back up and go through some other data points, because sometimes I understand, with us and myself included, I got to get something that really jolts me into action and makes me think about what's going on. How many of us have daughters or nieces or younger sisters who are between the ages of 10 to 18? Family members, etc. Okay, a few hands. Suicide by strangulation, that means something around the neck or something cutting off the airway, increased by 238% among black girls between the ages of 10 to 18 from 2006 to 2010. Now, this data point is actually a presentation that I do with one of my companies I work with. I've never heard that data point before.
Are you saying what the contributing factors are? 200%?
238%. Absolutely. It's not broken down for our demographic specifically, but what I do know is from my years of work in terms of suicide prevention, when it comes to youth, bullying, relationship issues, and for youth with relationships, it's usually their friend or significant other, and sometimes family conflict, divorce, etc. What we don't realize is, or I will say this, let me back up. One of the things that we don't give enough credit or significance to with our youth, when we step into that adult role, we got so many stressors ourselves. We're worried about paying bills, we're worried about life, we're worried about the pandemic, we're seeing negative imaging, etc. So when our children come home and say, you know, our friend isn't talking to us today, or Johnny broke up with me, we like, girl, that's the least of your problem. Like, you know, don't worry about that. It'll be all right. You'll get other friends, etc. And so we dismiss it. But to them, that's their entire world. That's all they know. Also, a lot of youth are coming up with more issues related to behavioral health and exhibiting signs of anxiety, anxiousness, depression, etc. And so if you're in a household where nobody's paying attention to that, then you already have some pre-symptoms related to behavioral health conditions that's not being addressed. And so when it comes to suicide, and I didn't even want to start this off talking about suicide, but when it comes to suicide, it's about that accumulation of problems and that buildup. And with youth, they're so impulsive. And so for me, what stands out the most, I remember going to a youth serving organization a couple of years ago because an 8-year-old African-American boy ended his life by suicide. And when I'm talking to the youth about who do you reach out to if you need help or support, I will never forget I was talking to a group of 7 to 8-year-olds, and those babies said, he did say that he was going to end his life. I told him not to, or I told him to tell someone. And so they're having these conversations, but they aren't having these conversations with us. And guess what? We aren't having these conversations with them.
That's right.
But they're having them amongst each other. And for me, I do not want to go into another organization or talk to another family where I hear a child say, my friend told me that he was going to end his life, and I'm there because he ended his life. I don't want to walk into another family where an adult ends their life because we are doing it. One of the things that I like to tell people, and I like history, is that when we talk about the myth of black people never killing themselves, that's not true. One of the most documented historical things of mass suicides among black people is with the Igbo tribe when they walked back into the water. And so we can't say that was ever the case. What was that? They didn't want to deal with the pain and the issues of being controlled on land, so they decided to take their own life. So similar thinking. So one of the things that I encourage people to do is ask, how are you managing and how are you coping? How many of us watch the news around George Floyd and some other things that have gone on for the past 2 years continuously around us? How many of us watched all that stuff? Those negative media images. How many of us watch Afghanistan and all of that, right? And so when we interpret that information, whether we realize it or not, it has an impact on the brain.
That's right.
Cortisol is being released, norepinephrine, things that we don't have control over that are going in and out of our body. And so if you're wondering why I'm tired, I can't focus, my memory is bad, I'm more agitated, I'm not functioning at my highest potential, it's because we're exposed to all of these stressors. And I just covered the global things, not even the personal things. Yes, sir.
Yeah, to your point, do you think, to that point about the increase in the suicides and everything, do you think the factor of that would be the social media?
Absolutely. Huge for youth and adults. Youth more so because they're paying attention and comparing themselves. And then adults because we do a similar thing, but we're not as impulsive. But absolutely, social media. So if you're looking at social media and you're comparing yourself to such and such because they got this, they got that, it seems like everything is all good and there are things that are going on in my life that I'm not dealing with healthy, absolutely can cause depression and anxiety. And so we got to guard our hearts and our mind to what information we allow in. Also with social media, there are news clippings of all the incidents that are going on. We saw things about George Floyd on social media. We saw stuff about Afghanistan. There are things that are going on in our local communities. And so again, all of that imaging that comes at us, it leaves a residue behind. And so if I had the ability today to put up a screen of brains where it had someone who was exposed to trauma directly, they specifically experienced it themselves, there would be certain highlights and coloring imaging on the brain. Have you all seen those imaging, the brain scans? If I watched it or talked about it or read about it, and you held my brain up next to it, they're going to be similar, almost the same impact in terms of the color imaging. So it's showing that whether I'm directly exposed to it myself or secondarily, it's going to be an impact. And so that's why we have to guard, I say guard our gateway to our eyes, our ears, however we're receiving information. And that includes conversations we have with fellow people who are talking about, did you hear about that incident? I was doing a debriefing one day, and this was for work. And it was regarding a national thing. I can't even remember what it was because that's how much I guard my ears and my eyes. But the lady gave me a rundown of the entire case. It wasn't her child that was missing. I think it was a missing child, or maybe a child died. It was an African-American girl who died. I can't remember the name because I try not to get connected to the names. But this lady who was in a completely different place ran down all the details. She had looked up all the information. And so that's registering in her brain, especially because she was a parent to a daughter. What if this was my child? And so it's drawing up all of that stuff and all those emotions and releasing those hormones in the body. We have to figure out a way to come down from that. And when we don't, all of that is circulating in the body and it's causing us to be sick, to be stressed out, to be sad, etc. And so this is where the importance of self-care is. And so your chairman passed out cards because, again, I'm providing you all with information, and I hope I'm kind of not scaring you, but making you more alert and aware. But I want to have a bit of a shock factor because these are real data points that I'm giving. But I have to give you a resource as well. Yes, sir.
Can I also add, what you saying, that what our people don't know is stress, worryation, depression, anxiety, like those are silent killers that affect your body and tear your body down.
Absolutely. And so when we walk around, you're definitely right, and we see people experiencing strokes, heart attack. People are turning to substance usage. That's why, for me and my community, including my close-knit community, the most difficult thing for me is to hear about someone using substances and actually overdosing and dying. And someone saying, well, you know how they are. That's just what they do. And I'm like, that's not normal. Like, what happened to them? What happened to them that resulted in them using the substances that resulted to their demise? Because that is not normal. And so we have to be our brothers and sisters keepers, right? And be courageous and say, no, that's not normal. I notice something is going on with you. Oh, you're using substances. I wonder what happened to you. You don't have to tell me all your business, right? I'm not trying to be nosy, but let me connect you to someone who can help you work through that, because I don't want to see you impact your health, or better yet, I don't want to see you die. And that's what this is about, because people are dying from stress, from mental wellness, or having issues with mental wellness and vicarious trauma. But trauma is the precursor. And so what you all have in your hand, and I'm actually going to leave this box here, as well as the other box as well. If you all ever need any more, you know how to get in contact with me. I will drop them off to you all personally. If you are involved in any other groups, let me know, because our role in working with this organization is to make sure that people have access, and we give out these cards like, I'm going to say fruit instead of candy because that sugar isn't good for us. But what that card is, it is to a free, no cost, 24/7, 365-day-a-year crisis line. And I'm talking about this because it's given that we are going to experience some sort of mental wellness stressor, okay? If we don't deal with those stressors, we move along in a continuum and it can lead up to a crisis. And I know you all, with working with law enforcement, they end up getting called to most crisis situations. Yes, sir. Absolutely, you can. They will reroute you, but there's also a national line as well. And so one of the things that happen, and I definitely want our community to be more aware of it, because most of the time we're less involved in our community around this issue. So let's say you or someone you know is having a mental health crisis or breakdown, right? They may be acting aggressive, they may be seeing things, they may not come out of their room, etc. Who are you gonna call for help and support? What comes up first? I pick up the phone and I dial what? 911. We pick up the phone because we are conditioned when we have an emergency, that's who we call. And so law enforcement comes out. Now, when law enforcement comes out, and I work extensively with law enforcement, I love many of my law enforcement officers. But the truth of the matter is, most of the folks who I know, unless they were a therapist before, no one woke up and said, I'm going to go into law enforcement because I want to help people through crisis. They said, I want to go into law enforcement mostly to help protect the community from bad guys, to maybe address some other crime-related things, right? But not because I want to help folks with behavioral health challenges. Those people who wake up and say that are like myself and your chairman, and we go to school for social work, counseling, mental health, etc. Everything else but that. But we're conditioned. So when that happens, we pick up the phone and call 911. An officer comes out, and they're trained through their training that they are provided. And oftentimes, because there's a conflict between the way that person is engaging, and he already talked about this, when they show up and something is going on, they have a reflex and a response in a way in which they carry out what they do. And so it can go very bad. Not that it always does. Matter of fact, I do know some officers who do an awesome job with engaging the community, helping individuals through crisis and etc. But when you ask them, what helps you get through this? It's not necessarily related to their training. It's them as a person and their character that says, I'm going to pause and slow down, and I'm going to meet this person where they are. Now, we have done a good job in, I say that loosely. We have, what's the word I want to use? We are redoing the way in which we train and work with law enforcement in the state of Georgia. And so more officers are getting CITV training, crisis intervention training, which for those who embrace it, it has helped tremendously because we're actually talking about behavioral health conditions and what that looks like and de-escalation techniques and community resources, etc. And so one of the things that you can do, if in the event that things are just completely out of control or you don't have access to this number, you can call and say, hey, I need a CIT trained officer to come out into the community to help my loved one who is exhibiting or has a behavioral health issue. How much ever information you have, at least give them that. Then when the officer gets on scene, let them know that as well, because sometimes that information isn't translated to them specifically. And when officers are going, and this is just based on the work, and you can chime in if you would like, they don't know what to expect. And it's on a very lower level for me, and so I'm going to be careful because it's definitely not the same as being an officer and being in uniform and responding. But in this day and time, we got a lot of stuff going on in our community. And so I know for me, when I go out in Atlanta, and I live city of Atlanta, I'm on higher alert. Especially as a woman, there's a lot of stuff going on with us women in this day and time. So I'm paying attention. I get off my phone when I get out the car. I carry, etc. And so think about if you're law enforcement and that's what you're doing day in and day out, do you think you're going to be more likely to walk into a situation and say, hey, Mr. Arnold, how are you doing today? How can I help you? What seems to be the problem? We're doing that because we're clinicians. That's the background and training that was ingrained in us, but not someone who is used to different things. But if you have access to these cards and it's not an emergency, someone hasn't taken a substance, they're not in the act of ending their life by suicide, etc., call that number. I hope that you all will put that number in your phone. I hope that you will take some additional cards with you, give them out to your family and friends, and say, hey, I heard about this awesome resource today that's absolutely free of charge for anyone who is exhibiting behavioral health. Even if you're depressed or have anxiety and you say, you know what, I just need help and support and I need to connect to a therapist, you can use this card and they will connect you to services. So for me, being on the other end of us, in my mind, there should be no reason why someone doesn't have access to behavioral health resources, because we have a free resource provided by the state of Georgia. And now Georgia doesn't do a lot of stuff well, right? And I've been living here for a minute, so I can say that I'm not downing us. But with this, we are doing something right. We're doing this good, and I can say that with confidence. We do have free access to resources, ages 4 and up. So even if the kids are having issues and challenges, you can utilize this resource as well. So what happens when I call this number? When I call this number, I'm going to get a licensed mental health professional over the phone, and they're going to ask me some questions. What's my name? Where am I located? We're asking that specifically just in case we have to send out someone or mobile crisis to you to provide further assistance. Guess what? Absolutely free of charge still. And then we're going to ask what's going on, what's showing up, how are you engaging, what are some of the symptoms, etc. We're doing that to figure out what is that next level of care, what's needed. Okay? And so I encourage you all to be open and honest and say this is what's going on. In addition, some of you all may say, well, you know what, I really don't feel comfortable talking over the phone. Is there a text feature? Guess what? We got you on that too. So on your phones, you can go into your app store, and there's My GCal. My GCal is downloadable through Google Play as well as the Apple Store. It's specifically geared towards youth because our youth quite naturally, what do they enjoy doing? Texting. And so it's important for you all to know that we've had youth who have been on the call with licensed clinicians 2, 3 o'clock in the morning while their parents are in their bed asleep. They think their babies are asleep, and their babies are up having issues. They're stressed, they're sad, they're hurting, they're experiencing emotional pain. And fortunately for the state of Georgia, because again, not every state has this, they can tap in confidentially to a licensed clinician. And that clinician is taking information to help connect and protect them as well. And so they're gonna ask where they are, because guess what? If that conversation changes, and they say, you know what, I'm thinking about ending my life, or I should just end it all, which is usually how youth say it, I just don't want to be here anymore. They're able to get to that youth. So for me, and I'm not a parent, but I have 3 gorgeous nephews, it's an added layer of protection. And so I'll tell you all what I did. I called up my nephews, and I do this often. I think this is the social worker in me. And I will say, hey, I found out about this resource that could help you. Either you or a friend, let me talk you through it and give you some ways or some ideas of when this may be helpful, so they have it in advance. And my hope is that if that time comes, and it's a likelihood that it will, these are 3 black boys, right, who are growing up in this day and age, they could very well have a mental health crisis or something go wrong. That they know that auntie talked to them about this, and this resource is available and it's free of charge. Or if their friend is going through something. So I don't wait for the crisis to happen and then I try to impart information. I'm talking to them in advance. So just as we want to talk to them about laws and the ways to engage law enforcement, we want to talk to them about their mental wellness. How do you know when you're stressed? What does that look like? Most of our youth, and many of us as adults, we don't even know how to verbalize, I'm just stressed out. We go to being short, kicking doors, hanging up the phone, etc., having arguments with those who are in close relation to us, versus just saying, you know what, I'm really stressed out right now. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world that's impacting me. There's stuff going on at my job. My finances might not be straight, etc. And so I'm having a difficult time. Just give me a moment to decompress. Or do we know how to manage our own stressors in terms of what I need to do to help me relax? Okay. One of the things that was mentioned also earlier, and I'm going to go back to these slides, it's slide 22. It is a worksheet that has self-care commitment worksheet. And you all, there are a lot of data and statistics in this. Use this as a conversation piece for however long. If you post on social media, post a data point or a statistic on social media and put, did you know? That's a great way to start conversation as well. I did that a lot when I first came on board in terms of suicide, because a lot of this stuff I had no idea was impacting our community like this. But in that self-care commitment worksheet, you're going to see, ooh, and this is small, and I'm probably telling my age. You're going to see 5 domains. I'm just going to do it from my memory. Mental wellness, emotional wellness, physical, spiritual, and financial. So those are the 5 main pillars of wellness. So what do I mean by that? If we're looking for ways to address these stressors that we already know are present, we at a minimum need to cover these 5 areas. What does that look like? I'm thinking about what are the things that impact my mental wellness. It could be anything from me, again, receiving information that's traumatizing, imaging that's traumatizing, something that gives me anxiety, things that make me sad. It could be grief and loss, etc. When it comes to the emotional wellness, it could be who do I need to put up boundaries with, right? That are trying to get me to do something, that are draining my resources, or that person that when I walk into their space, my energy drains or I become frustrated. Do y'all know anybody? Absolutely. And so we got to think about that again, know ourselves. So I know when I go in the room with this person, or when this person calls my phone, it might irritate my soul. And so I may not talk to that person very often. I definitely have some people like that. Matter of fact, their phone it's actually on do not disturb, so I don't even see it pop up, because that's a trigger for me, and I don't need them impacting my good mental wellness when I'm working or on the weekends. So I have to look to see if they tried to contact me, and that's how serious I am about protecting my soul and my mental wellness. Now on that, and this was mentioned earlier, is financial wellness, and we already talked about why that's important. It's hard for me to do certain things if I'm thinking or I'm stressed about my finances. So something we would put down there is I'm going to do a budget, or I'm going to do an outlook and really look at and tease through to see what my finances even are. Some of us become so stressed about our finances, we won't even look at it. We just avoid it. I think it's going to go away. And it's not. So if we address those things, and this is based on theory, and they call it Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I call it Jesus' hierarchy of needs because it's in the Bible for me. And so when we do these fundamental things, it allows us to focus and make better decisions and be more happy and productive and have joy, right? And contribute to our communities. When we don't have the energy, we don't have the capacity. We may be so depressed that we don't even care. And when we don't care about our community, our families, and ourselves.
That's right.
And our soul, and that's a bad way to be.
Right.
And so this is why I do the work that I do, because it's important to me. And what I notice is that when we do these things, and one I left out is physical wellness. How many of us do some sort of physical exercise for at least 30 minutes a day? Few hands, okay, just a few. So I'm going to encourage you that this is my challenge to you all. One, actually do this activity and fill it out. What it says is, what are some of the things that impact those 5 domains? And then also under those 5 domains, what are some of the things that I can do that promote wellness, that give me joy, that give me peace, etc. It's important for us to, one, know the things that bother us, right, that impact us negatively, but then know what can I do to help improve me, to help bring me back up, to help restore, to help replenish me. So that if in the event these things happen that bring me down, I have something to counter it, or something that continues to build me up. I mentioned the physical wellness. That's important because earlier on when I talked about trauma, I said cortisol is being released and norepinephrine, and it's causing a reaction in the body. Brings our mood down. We don't have the ability to concentrate. We can become agitated. We gain weight in that stomach area, etc. And for us women, it's harder to lose there because of the way our bodies are set up. Men go start trying to lose, and they lose there first. And so it's important for us to know this, because when we do self-care, it helps restore those balances. When we do physical exercise, it releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins in the brain. What is that? That's those feel-good mood stabilizers. So it helps bring us back up. So when I was seeing direct clients, when people would say, I'm thinking about getting on medication, I said, okay, let's just hold off. I don't promote medication first anyway. But I said, let's try some things. Let's get you on a good self-care plan. I have them to fill out this worksheet. Matter of fact, I did this worksheet under the pandemic myself because it was difficult. And again, we not okay in terms of going through this. But I get them to do that physical exercise. And that physical exercise and being consistent, releasing that dopamine, that serotonin in the brain, oftentimes makes them feel a lot better. So we can see what that real baseline is. Oftentimes those same individuals who are asking for medication don't need it. Why is that? The medication that they were going to get releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins in the brain. But we have a natural way to do it. The question is, are we going to get up and actually do it? Now, one of the challenges that I get from people is, well, I don't have the motivation to do exercise. How do you stay motivated? And so one of the things that I say is, it's kind of that chicken or the egg phenomenon. What are you going to do first? But if I focus in my mind, and for us this is a part of CBT, what's the why? Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because it releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins in the brain. And it makes me feel good. And it's scientific, and there's research out there that says this. So if I do it and I do it consistently, those individuals start to notice a difference and they start to feel better. And when you do it consistently, you can't deny the therapeutic effects that happen. So usually when I talk to groups, I'll ask, is there someone who engages in physical exercise often, and why do you do that? I do that because I don't want people to think I'm being the expert in the room and just go off what I'm saying. Talk to your peers. For those who work out and work out consistently will say, when I don't work out, I don't feel right. Something in my day feels off. I don't rest as well. I'm anxious. Something about my mood is just off. We need to hear that so that we can figure out what sort of physical exercise fits our mood and our need. You don't have to do what I do or what the next person does, but do something for you. All right? And so again, fill out this worksheet. That's my challenge, my homework to you all. If you don't mind that I'm assigning you that, because this is going to help you. It seems very elementary, and it is easy. But if you do it and implement it, you will notice a difference within your mood and how you show up and your overall health and wellness. It's proven. And so for me, when I work with my clients, I operate from a point of self-love. And if I love myself like I say I do, which we all love ourselves, right? Because sometimes we might be some of the only few who do. If I love myself like I say I do, then I should have engaged in some sort of self-care activity. And so the question is, how have you shown yourself love today? And I should be able to check off some actions that I've actually taken daily to show myself love. Some other things that I'm going to mention real quick that I look at when we're talking about self-care is sleep. Are we getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep? And your response in here is what I often get, because most of us adults, we don't really pay attention to that, right? The only time we're paying attention to is when we're trying to send kids to bed. And so that 7 to 8 hours that allows our bodies to get into its resting state for it to replenish and restore itself. Our digestion slows down, but there are things that are still happening in the body that does not have the most effective state when we are awake and alert. And when we don't get that 7 to 8 hours, it builds up over time. And as we get more mature, I'm not going to say older, as we get more mature in life and seasoned, it builds up to sleep deprivation. And what happens when we're deprived of sleep? Our mood is low. We can't focus. Our memory is jacked up. Our mood, all the way leading up to, if we get to a certain point, we can experience a level of psychosis. And so we want to make sure that we are getting proper rest so that we can replenish and restore ourselves. Now, this is all evidence-based that I'm talking to you all about. The research is there. And so if you have any question, please look it up. The other thing is nutrition. What are we taking into our bodies? Now, this is a big one. I often get smiles around this. Especially with working remotely and being in our home. If most of us are working remotely, or we just might have easy access, period. Depends on what's in our household. If we're eating chips, crackers, sugars, sweets, comfort foods, etc., it's slowing down our body's ability to respond to that trauma. So even when I attend a trauma training, what do they tell me at the end of it? To eat green leafy vegetables, lean proteins, and lots of water. Now that's because I attended a training. That's not even me going through life. And so if they're telling me that to sit through a training, what about life? What should I be eating? Green leafy vegetables, lean proteins, complex carbs, to allow our body to restore back to normal functioning, and then the physical exercise. So one of the questions that I get is, how do I know when I'm in trouble? When I need to really see someone or do things different. Some of us may have the ability to hold ourselves accountable. It's very few to say, you know what, I know this about me, so I'm going to start doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to be consistent. If you're not sleeping 7 to 8 hours, if your diet is not healthy and consistent based on your own body, or i.e. what your doctor has recommended for you, and if you're not getting physical exercise, or it impacts your ability to go to work, to take care of yourselves, to take care of your family, or be an active member of your community, that's when you know you really need to reach out for help and support, or do things differently. Okay? Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
To piggyback off something you said, some studies that came out maybe like 2 years ago about mental health, and when I worked in DeKalb County, we had a lot of officers involved shooting that involved citizens that had mental health issues, and it should have been handled differently. So what they did was they made all of us go take the CIT training. And they started a mobile crisis unit. So when 911 calls came in, and it was specifically a mental health issue, they have a licensed clinician person that rides with the officer. So he or she is safe with them. They don't have to have an officer to go out there for something criminal, because it's not criminal, it's mental health. And they will go out there, they will assess the person. They be 10-13, they'll go ahead and have that emotion, and that whole process it's working more, and I think more police departments are starting to embrace that. At South Fulton, where I work now, everybody has to be CIT certified. It's mandatory. You have to do it. And from my perspective, I'm the hostage negotiator. So when she's talking about the suicide stuff, it's real. I mean, and I got to get called out because it is something real serious. And you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to the people on the other line doing negotiations, all of them up to this point have been mental health issues, and some of them have been undiagnosed. Some of them are just off meds right then. But you know, from a law enforcement standpoint, I can kind of see the strides. They're trying to make it better. And now we're seeing a man running down the street, or a female, no clothes on, sweating, silent delirium, something going on. I gotta know what it is. And I got a degree in psychology, so I know a little bit more than the other officers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for you to use that word, you sure did. I will say this though, there are officers like Detective King, who I've worked with, and the mobile crisis team that I'm thinking about, who do an excellent job in the community, and they really embrace those principles. One of the things I will say, and I believe in just being open and honest and transparent, the unfortunate thing is, and this is pertaining to the case that you talked about in DeKalb, there was a case in Texas that I've used for presentations as well. The unfortunate thing is those officers were CIT trained. So just because every officer is CIT trained, it doesn't necessarily mean they embrace those principles. So I educate and say, hey, you can ask for a CIT trained officer, but I would also do a disservice to you to say just because you get a CIT trained officer that all is going to go well. So the best thing that I encourage my community members to do is, one, again, tell that officer when they get on the scene, it's behavioral health. Again, the videos that I'm thinking about in my mind, one of the parents did do that, and her son actually ended up getting killed in the driveway by officers. So I say all that to say, advocate as much as possible. If you have someone in your home who has a behavioral health condition and they sometimes especially get aggressive, stay in contact with that law enforcement department that's most likely to come out to them and let them know that, hey, you know, my son exhibits this, or my husband or my brother, etc. If you see this person, note that they're not being aggressive, but it's a behavioral health thing, at least, so there's some leeway to say, you know, this is such and such, and we know they have mental health issues and conditions. In some communities, they will jot down a note in the system or through 911. It just depends on how much you advocate on behalf of your loved one. I'll say it like that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, I guess first I have to apologize. I've been in and out with this, so you may have already answered this question. But getting back on the self-care topic you were speaking about before, how do you suggest people that definitely feel like they don't have time to do like small
great question, especially for moms, for parents, etc. One of the things is that we have to get out of thinking that self-care is this big thing that we have to do and figure out ways to integrate it into our daily lifestyle. Now, I talked about sleep, eating, and physical exercise. Now, those are 3 core principles. 2 of them, at least, we automatically do, right? And so we should be making good decisions, at least in terms of what we're eating and making sure we're getting proper rest, and then add the physical exercise in there. Now, when it comes to how do I prioritize, that's going to be between yourself and yourself. And so the question is, why is it important? So, and you're a mom, right? Because I saw you with the babies.
Yeah.
It's so important because you have your babies. And so, what's their gender?
Both girls.
So you have 2 girls who are going to grow up to be women. And for the women of us in the room, and not to discount the men, we are responsible for a lot. We have our own things we are responsible for. Men have their own things they're responsible for, and how they show up in the world as well. But you know what it's like to be a woman. And so when you think about that, and you think about, I'm raising 2 girls to be women, what are some of the things that I want to make sure that they do that I don't do so well? I'm going to start doing those things well because they're watching. And so the conversations that my mother never had with me around mental wellness, self-care, managing stress, if I ever had a daughter, when I show up in these spaces, I'm going to talk about that because no one shared it with me, and it's imperative. Also, some of the messaging that we send to both men and women. Women, we usually hear, you're a strong woman, right? I hate that terminology. I'm not strong, I'm resilient. I don't want to be strong. I don't want to be mentally strong. I have hard days. I don't want you to even put that on me. For men, right? You all hear stuff that is supposed to be encouraging, but I imagine sometimes y'all are like, man, listen, this is hard. Like, I wish I had someone to go to and to talk to, or just take a moment and just express myself. We do that. We're doing mental wellness because no one gave us spaces or permission to do that. And so I encourage us to be courageous and to be empowered and say, you know what, no one ever taught me this, but I'm going to do this for me because those little people are watching and my community needs me. And so in order for me to be a more productive person, parent, and member of my community, it's not even a choice. It's an obligation to yourself. And then when you start doing it, you will feel better. And so what I encourage people to do, don't think it's going to get massages and spending money. It's going off to retreats and vacation. Like, we've commercialized it. They did that to make money off of it. It's eating, sleeping, taking breaks, deep breathing. When you're with the kids, you can engage in deep breathing. Just 5 inhales and exhales. We can do certain things to help us cope. Along the way, then you have to figure out, does this help, or what else do I need to add to it? But for me, it's just not an option. I take it off the table as being an option. So I encourage my parents especially to do that because we need you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
First, I want to rise, even on Facebook, got a lot in high points to property I wanted to, I had one question and then I just wanted to make a comment. The question was, I didn't catch what the CIT training, the CIT.
Crisis intervention training. I'm sorry, I did not say it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I was meant to know for that. And I also wanted to express some gratitude for all the speakers who have come out, and said everything that they said so far. I also see how it all integrates and relates. And I didn't think, I appreciate the numbers and the statistics to help really put in perspective the problems we're dealing with. And I definitely appreciate hearing you here, because this organization is a top organization. And, just like in the name of the organization, Moorish Science Temple of America, science is the study of the thing, so in studying the issues and the things that pretty much color our plight, to come up with the remedy, we have to be able to, we understand that it's important to go about it in a scientific approach or in an approach where there's a methodology to really understand it's not hard hearing those because it doesn't seem to me personally like it puts it in perspective and reminds me so I can be able to kick myself in high gear or get out of whatever slump I may be in. And I appreciate what the sister said earlier when she was saying that she thinks therapy is just something that should be needed in general. To what the detective or Detective King said. Because I just remember coming up or the way I was raised, you know, we just put it to the side and, you know, keep pushing and, you know, especially as a man, we don't talk about that kind of stuff. We don't get too sensitive and all that other kind of stuff. You know, so finding a different way to fix our solutions, to come up with solutions to our dilemmas, to our problems, I think it's essential. So I appreciate everything that you speak.
Absolutely. Thank you for that recap. And also to identify and create spaces such as this, and even more vulnerable spaces, right? I don't expect anyone to open up and say, well, this is what I'm really going through. But to create and identify a space for you to be open, honest, and transparent, whether it's with a therapist, whether it's with a brother, a sister, etc., who you can really be open and honest. Because again, when I say we are not okay, and I'm gonna figure out how to say that in a better way because I just feel like it's so disempowering. But we are experiencing and have experienced so much. One of the things that I used to do, I used to go into a group setting and do a scale called Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it's the ACEs. And so what it does, it identifies 10 childhood traumas that we could have been exposed to prior to the age of 18. The last time I did it, it was helpful, but the impact of it for me, it just did so much to the people I was talking to that I was like, I can't do that within an hour or an hour and a half. Oftentimes we have experienced stuff in childhood, and this happened to me, that I didn't realize was a trauma. No one ever gave me that word or permission to say the word trauma. It was just something I went through, something I experienced. But when you look at that scale and you see, yeah, I went through this, and this, and you get a number to say, these are all the traumatic incidents that I have experienced prior to the age of 18. That's why my sister back here said everybody deserves therapy. I say it's a birthright, especially for us. And so when we think about that, there are things that have happened to us that impact the way we see things, our relationships, the way in which we interact with law enforcement. For me, and I'll give you two of my childhood trauma, well, one that was alerting to me and then another experience related to law enforcement. So as I was doing my ACE, I have an older brother who is no longer here on earth. Super close to my heartbeat. So when I was younger, he was in and out of prison. And every time he went to court or in and out of prison, it would have a negative effect on me. I would be super emotional, crying. When he went to court and got sentenced right before my eyes, I would not eat until he called. And you know, they have to process you through Jackson, they gotta place you. I wouldn't eat until he called. And so my mom was like, girl, what's wrong with you? You know you gotta eat, da 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 da. You know, the typical black mama. You better eat. Not saying what is wrong, let's talk about this. And so when I did that ACE, one of the things on there says, was a person in your household in and out of jail or prison, or incarcerated, however they say it. And so for me, I was like, wow, that's trauma, that's what I was going through. But no one ever explained it to me. So I felt like something was wrong with me, the fact that I wasn't eating until my brother called me. So I felt some type of way about myself. The other thing is, and I share this when I do my work with law enforcement, growing up and having that brother who was in and out of the system and doing what he did, there were some times where I got some of that negative messaging about law enforcement, right? Don't bring law enforcement around. They don't want to see them, this and that, blase, right? And then there were some times where I think I had got pulled over a couple of times by law enforcement. I felt like for no reason. Law enforcement long story short, my brother took my car to get it cleaned when I was in high school, or maybe I was in undergrad. Whoever cleaned the car got the trash. Somehow the trash ended up on the side of the road. So law enforcement comes to me the next day or a couple days and says, you got to go pick up this trash. And so I was like, I'm not picking up no trash because I didn't do it. And so it was just a difficult exchange. And so my relationship, even though I didn't have specific encounters with law enforcement, it just was never good. And so even until this day, when I see law enforcement, I have to remind myself and check myself that you're a professional, Reinette. You engage and train with, I'm a CIT trainer. I do training for the Citizens Academy. We do other specialized training with law enforcement, all of that stuff. But there's a part of me that's like, when I meet a new officer, is this a new officer who's gonna be my friend, or is it a new officer who's gonna be on one? Not because of something that happened, a trauma between me and law enforcement, but just being in that environment and messaging. So we would call that implicit bias, stuff that just shows up subconsciously that has you looking at something like, I don't know how this experience is gonna go. So again, we don't have control over that. And a lot of the times that's the things that are going on with us. And sometimes them as well. And so that is probably my time. I have enjoyed you all today. I thank you again. These cards are here. There's some in the back. I'm gonna leave those. I thank you.